Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. This is Localization Addict. I'm Hagane and you might be asking yourself, who the heck is that? Well, I'm an aspiring video game localizer and raging nerd looking to analyze Japanese games from a linguistic perspective and offer my opinion on their English localizations. So, without further ado, let's get started. Disclaimer, do not take my word as a universal truth. Translation is incredibly subjective and another translator might have another, equally valid view of things I'm going to talk about. Feel free to disagree with me at any time and please do not insult others with a different opinion. I'm here today to look through the translation process behind the localization of the visual novel Danganronpa Trigger Happy Havoc. This video might include spoilers, so if you haven't played the game already, I recommend that you do so before watching. Plus, it's awesome. First off, let's get the obvious out of the way, the title. Because, as we will see many times in this channel, nothing in text exists without a purpose. Although Danganronpa is written in katakana in the original, something like this, it is a two-word compound made of the words dangan and rompa. Okay, but what do these words mean exactly? Well, dangan means bullet, and rompa literally means to destroy or to obliterate an argument, and the actual meaning is to win an argument. So basically, the entire word would mean something like bullet, argument winning, or destroying, which makes a lot of sense considering the game is literally about pointing a gun towards your opponent's arguments. Since I didn't work on this localization, I can't say for sure what exactly prompted the decision to leave the title untranslated, but I can think of two things that might have happened off the top of my head. The first one is that it might have been a decision made by the author or a higher up and totally outside the control of the translators, something that happens quite often. The second one is that the English title was too long and or boring, and so they decided to let it go unchanged. This is something that often happens with video games that have a limited character capacity, especially older games, since Japanese can convey meaning in less characters than English does. One example of this is how the word for rice cooker, which is 11 characters long in English, turns into a 3-character long word in Japanese, suihanki. Now let's move on to the subtitle, Trigger Happy Havoc. In Japanese, this subtitle is 希望の学園と絶望の高校生, which literally means the Institute of Hope and the Students of Despair. This is the first time in the game where this theme of hope or 希望 versus despair or 絶望 appears. Why was this translated as Trigger Happy Havoc then? Well, my guess would be that this was a way to localize the name Danganronpa itself rather than this subtitle. As we just saw, Danganronpa is a word with a meaning of its own. However, translating literally often results in awkward, weird English sentences, so they probably went with trigger happy because the protagonist has to use a gun many times, albeit a metaphorical one. The havoc part, I think, would be a way of merging the despair plus hope situation going on in the original subtitle with the argument-winning part of the word Danganronpa, thus generating this sort of double meaning where you can preserve both Danganronpa and the duality, aka conflict, from the Institute of Hope and the Students of Despair. Of course, from a literary point of view, the theme of hope versus despair is lost on this subtitle. However, if we look at it from the perspective of who the audience is, and this is a crucial task for translators, we will find that this is a title that is easy to track back to the game if you are an English speaker playing, just like Japanese players do with the original title. I think it was a clever way to merge both the title and the subtitle without neglecting the need for a shorter title in English. If I were to imagine an ideal situation with an unlimited number of characters to use, I would maybe have translated the game as Argument-Winning Bullets, the Institute of Hope versus the Students of Despair. Now you might be asking, why did you turn and into versus? Well, for that, we need to take a closer look at how and, versus, and to function as words. Both to and are coordinating conjunctions that work as links between two noun clauses. Okay, let's translate that to English now. Basically, and is a bridge we use so that nouns and things that behave similarly to them aren't floating in the air. This means that it connects two concepts and relates them to one another in some way. Versus also does this, except that instead of creating a link, it creates a contrast between two things. Now let's look at our nouns here. hope and despair, which are opposites. What the author is trying to do is help you make that connection in your head. This use of to is kind of implying this disparity between two conflicting ideas, the Institute of Hope and the Students of Despair. That's why I chose versus instead of and, although I think both are completely valid translations, because contrary to popular belief, translation and especially localization is very subjective. Okay, now that's out of the way, let's go towards our next step, the start screen. The one difference that catches my attention is how the press start part is slightly different in each version. In the Japanese version, this part of the menu is already in English. So why not leave it just like that in the English localization? Well, one thing that comes to mind is naturalness. The phrase press start might sound slightly better than press start button, although I couldn't find that many examples of it in other games. If the audience is more used to one option, then it's a good idea to change it to that regardless of whether the text was in English or not. In this case, I think both are valid options, but personally I wouldn't have changed it, since it's not uncommon either to see this in other games such as the ones you're seeing on the screen. Moving on, let's look at the first sentence we read when starting the game. In English, it says blast off. In Japanese, it says 宇宙旅行, which means space travel. Now, I think that what the translators did here was to turn space travel, which in itself wouldn't make as much sense in English as in Japanese, since in Japanese it's very common to use nouns as a standalone without much of an explanation, into a phrase that is more understandable, makes the text more fluid, and is also related to space travel. What the original is doing is telling the audience in a superficial, childish way what is going on in that scene. As we will see in later examples, Monokuma speaks in a similar way to how a child would. That's why he merely describes the scene as space travel. This childishness is not as obvious in the English localization, however we can still get it from the phrase blast off. Our first indicator is the exclamation mark at the end. It's used to show a wide range of emotions, but here I believe the most plausible interpretation is that of excitement from the part of the speaker. Subtle, but effective. Our second indicator is the wording itself. Blast off is a pretty informal way to describe a rocket taking off. This informality and simpleness can also be interpreted as childish, and it adds to the overall effect of the sentence. Well, I think I'll stop the video here. Stay tuned for part 2. If you like this video and would like me to make more videos like this, hit that like button and subscribe. See you next time!